History is not only the study of stories, but the study of storytellers. To understand history, you not only need to know what was said, but why it was said. Which is why we're going to be talking with our senior guests about their most historical moments and why it was important to them. Welcome to Branches Between Generations, the video podcast where students from the digital age sit face to face with seniors from Canada's retirement capital. This episode is all about history.
Hello and welcome back to Podio Studio. We're going to start this episode by doing a little bit of a montage. We're going to hear about our seniors' experiences during World War II, as well as hearing the reactions of our student guests. Let's have a listen.
What was considered expensive when you were younger, and how much was that?
Well, we didn't have chocolate. And every railway station, of course, always had a little chocolate machine.
Oh, cool.
And when I was a kid, it was always 3 pennies. And we had little threepenny bits, which was a multi-sided little coin. But they cut off all those machines when we were children because of the war. So we didn't have much candy at all. But we had what we called chewing wood. And it was pieces of wood and you just chewed on them. And it had a flavor. And I've never found out, and nor does anybody else I know that was English, know what that chewing wood tree was coming from. But we always chewed on it because it was something to get that we didn't have much food for. And at school we had to go strawberry picking every summer and blackberry picking because they were free in the woods around wherever we lived.
Yeah. Okay, what did you do for fun as a kid?
As a kid, oh my goodness. I think we roamed the streets more than kids do now.
Yeah.
We did everything together as a group of kids who lived on streets. And you have to remember when I was a kid, there was a war on in my country.
Yeah.
So it was very, very different.
Yeah.
It changed when we started getting the Americans coming to the country because they had a lot more food than we did. So it became our slogan to say, "Got any gum, chum?" And hopefully we did get some. The Americans always looked so tall and so well dressed.
I see.
I was born 6 years before the war started. And I remember the day it started. I had been to see a friend, and I was walking home, and a van came down the street with a big megaphone on it, and it was blasting out that Britain had just declared war on Germany.
How did that make you feel as a 8-year-old child to hear about war? Did you even understand what that was at that age?
I didn't, but we had in school been told that Germany was a very aggressive force, and that they may even invade England. And so, as kids, we thought about that quite a bit and wondered what would happen if we got invaded and taken over by the Germans.
You'd have to learn a whole new language, right?
Well, have to plan a whole new life for sure. Yes. Because if they had come, we certainly wouldn't be speaking English. You're right. We'd be speaking German. And not far from where I lived, there was the largest Canadian squadron of Lancaster bombers in Europe at the time. So I used to go up in the afternoon and sit by the fence and watch these guys take off and go off to Germany to do the
Yeah.
nightly bombing.
Where were you in the UK? Were you in London or were you in a smaller town?
No, I was London and just a little bit north, Coventry and other places, really took the brunt of the German bombing. I was almost on the Scottish border.
Okay, so that's way up
So-
north.
Yeah, we were very safe. We rarely got bombed, and the sirens used to go and the planes would come over, but it was really not a big threat.
Did you ever visit London during the war, or you stay away?
No, I didn't. Believe it or not, I had never been to London until I left England to come to Canada.
So you
I'd never been.
So that was the first 20 years of your life?
Yeah.
So do you think you wish you were born a little bit later so that you would have been able to pick a different career? Like, were you happy with
Well,
when you were born?
it probably wouldn't have been a bad thing to miss the war.
Yeah.
The Second World War was going on. My first memories are of bombs. And my grandmother's house just being flattened one night. It was there one day, and the next day the whole block is flat. Houses in the street just disappearing. And we had, I didn't see my father for several years. He was off in the military, as was every other able-bodied man.
Yeah, I can imagine what you went
It
through.
was that part wasn't good because we lived in fear, and the normal things that we think of as normal in family life just weren't there. We came through it, so yeah, I wouldn't have minded missing that, but it still was an experience, and you take your experiences and you work with them.
Yeah, that was definitely a hard time to be alive that time.
Yeah, it was.
What?
But
You survived? You didn't get flattened?
survived, yeah, and it's going on all the time. There's people in Ukraine and
Yeah.
Gaza and so on who are going through the same thing right now, maybe worse.
Yeah. Kind of scared to think if there'd be a World War III at some point.
Who knows?
Don't know.
We hope the folks at the top have more sense, but
Yeah.
You don't know.
You mentioned your father was in the war.
Yeah.
Do you remember when he returned? Or
I
what
think he
those,
came back.
kind of it must have been strange having him away for so long and then I guess reintegrating.
Yeah, well, he would come. I mean, when I say he was away, basically he was away. He would turn up for a couple of days once in a while when he got some leave. Then he would pay a lot of attention to my mother, and the kids sort of came secondary. So I missed. I'm sure my brothers too missed. The other brother that was born during the war missed our dad. I think he came back home in 1947. So the war had been over a couple of years, but of course they didn't demobilize the troops immediately because they were worried about the Russians.
Mm-hmm.
So people were still in the forces, and then gradually they were let go. And then, he went back to the job which had been kept for him, as it was for most of the men. The jobs they left when they got called up were more or less reserved for them to come back to. So he went back. He was in an insurance company, and he just went back to that. And then food began to appear in the shops and actually on display in the shops, because before that, everything had been rationed. And it was still rationed for a while after the war because the supplies weren't there. And I remember the sweet shop. And we had special shops that were candy shops, sweet shops. And they kept all the sweets in big jars in the window. And then you went in and you got them weighed out into a little bag for you. And I remember the sweet shop gradually filling up with these big jars of candy, but they couldn't open until a certain date. That was a government order. Can't open a sweet shop, and you can't open a this, and you can't open that until a certain date, so that they could get the stocks in, and then they wouldn't get runs on the stocks and so on, riots and such. So yeah, rationing gradually ended, and we got, but it took about 5 years after the war for things to get back to any sort of normalcy.
Yeah.
I remember all that.
Would you say that you didn't have a father figure?
Not in the early years.
No.
Later,
Yeah.
But then I was like 10, 11 years old.
So did anybody like come in to like refill that spot, like to be kind of like?
No, it was all women, various women. I mean, there were grandparents and aunts and so on, but there were no uncles or fathers.
No. Yeah, so you had a lot of your family like nearby, like you lived in the same town.
Well, a couple of the families were nearby, and
Yeah.
others were not too far away. People didn't move as much in those days.
No, yeah, I guess.
I was born in 1938, before the Second World War began. And so my family, all the male people went overseas.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was an upsetting time when your mom and dad weren't there and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But my grandfather had this big radio, and my goodness, in the evening, you could not talk. And so, because we had to listen to the BBC News and where the war was taking place, or where the soldiers were stationed.
Right, yeah.
And so that was interesting. So you probably don't know anything about that era of time.
Yeah, barely anything really.
And so anyway, my grandmother used to knit scarves and socks, and my little sister and I had to unravel the wool and make it into balls and whatnot. And we lived on the farm at that point in time. And you had to be we lived also on the Alaska Highway, and we had to be very careful. That was in the 40s, very careful about the lights going out to the barn, because they were so afraid of the Russians coming down and going through.
Mm.
And so those are my first impressions of what was going on, like what is the war, and I knew where it was.
Yeah.
And so when the war finally ended in 1945, I could not believe how they caught Hitler and how they brought him over, and they were going to burn him at the town hall. And I had no idea, I couldn't understand how Europe was far away and we're here, and how they could find this man and bring him over here.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it was effigy, and I did not know what that meant.
Oh,
Did
I
not
don't
know.
even know what that means.
Well, it was just a straw person that they put up and was going to burn. I had no idea. And that frightened me for a long, long time. And so then when my mother, she went to Calgary, and she was known as the Rosie the Riveter, and riveting things into airplanes for it to go over to Europe.
I see, right, yeah.
And that was well known, Rosie the Riveters, and there was a lot of girls. And so then when my father came back from overseas, and my uncles and whatnot, then we're all a family again. And a family time was really important, like Thanksgiving and Christmas, and the crops were all off the fields and whatnot. So I don't know if you even know anything about that kind of era.
I mean, I've studied it in school, and I've heard like stories from my grandparents. And my great grandma, her name was Ma. Well, I called her Ma, and she grew up also in the war times. But she never told me too many like stories. I think it gave her a little bit of like emotional, kind of like not trauma, but just not something she wanted to like have a headspace of that day. So I never really grew up understanding about the war and about early 1940s, 50s. So it's lovely to hear about it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was, and at the thrashing time, when the thrashers came on the farm, they would go from one farm to another and get all the crops off. And it was always a big time. It was a big party time, because there was tea time in the morning, and then there was lunch, and then there was tea time in the afternoon, and then a big meal. Then everybody went home. They came back the next day. And in about 3 days, maybe 4, all your farm was all harvested. Then they went to the next farm and they did that. And then, of course, once the crops were all off and the garden was looked after and food was put away for the winter, then it was Thanksgiving. And then the families all came together for Thanksgiving dinner. And that was such a special time. And I still have a great feeling for Thanksgiving. It has to be family and the big turkey and everybody around and the laughter and the singing and the food and the puzzles afterwards to do. Same with Christmas.
Oh, I love that. Almost nostalgic.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
To round out this episode, we have one more senior introduction, somebody who you guys haven't met in the series yet, and that is June.
My name is June Seymour. I was born in 1934.
Like Peter and David, June was in England during the Second World War, and she will be talking to Keith about her experiences and her childhood memories of growing up during the war, as well as what her life looked like when she immigrated to Canada in her adult life. Let's have a listen.
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
And
Fine, thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah. Yeah, I met another person around your age from England, but he was more from the north. His name was Peter. He's also over at the retirement community with you.
Mm-hmm.
So what was it like growing up in England?
Well, it was different
Yeah.
because I was 5 when the war started, and I was evacuated twice. Didn't really have any childhood, per se.
Yeah.
I was evacuated when I was 6, and then again when I was 9.
Yeah.
Because the war got very, what's the word I want? Very, it was bad. Let's put it that way. That's the only word I can think of at the moment. It was very bad at that time. So this is why I was evacuated from London, because London got it the worst of all, because
That was the capital of England.
that's
and
right.
it still is.
And
but
it's where the royalty lived.
Yeah.
And they were bombed at one time. Yeah. So the Germans wanted London to be off the map kind of thing. My second husband was married again in 1984. And he was in the army when he was 16. And he was in England. He was Canadian, but he was in England. And he was on the radar, which could see or could tell by the radar screen if the Germans were coming to England. So he had a very interesting job, and he loved it.
And then I guess once they identified that there was an incoming craft, this is when you guys had your blackout drills and all that kind of. Is that the term?
Oh,
blackout?
yes, there were a lot of
Maybe-
blackouts. Yeah.
Can you explain
yeah.
to Keith what that means?
And I was kind of young at that time, you know.
I'm
I
sure
was
you were.
11 when it finished.
Mm.
So I was still young, and my husband was 10 years older than me. So he went into the army. They thought he was 18
yeah.
because he looked older.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people did back then.
Yeah. He wanted adventure.
Well, that's one way
He
to
got
find
it.
adventure in that time.
Oh yeah.
I know
got
a
it.
lot of young people under the ages of 18 unnecessarily lost their lives because
Oh,
they decided to
definitely,
enlist in the
definitely.
war.
Yeah. It's very sad.
It is.
Very sad. He knew when he went into the army that he was not going to get killed. He said, I just had that feeling. And
Yeah.
he had a good time.
You had a good time?
Oh, he had a good time, yeah.
Yeah.
With all his friends and going to Europe. He had a good time.
You got the ability to travel.
Well, that's it. You know, he was young and fancy free.
Yeah.
I felt that I lost a lot of my childhood.
Yeah.
Okay, I was 11 when it finished. My father was in the Navy, and my mother wanted children, but she didn't want to bring any more into the world.
Yeah.
Because of the war. So I was an only child. But there were times when I was scared, and there were times when we had lots of laughs. We had a shelter at the bottom of the garden.
Yeah.
And we'd go there and sleep there. It wasn't very comfortable, but it was okay. But I was evacuated to a lady for a year and a half when I was 6. And she was a lovely lady. her and her husband. And they spoilt me, of course.
Yeah.
Because they never had any children until later on. And then the second time I was evacuated was horrible because I was with a lady that accused me and the other girls that were there of stealing things. And she was a horrible lady.
Yeah.
And I was only there about 6 months. I spent my 10th birthday there.
Yeah.
So it was towards the end of the war.
What were your teenage years like after the war?
I left school at 15 and went to work in an office. Worked there for a year and a half and left and went to work for somewhere else. And then I went to an insurance company in London. And I stayed there over 6 years.
Yeah, what made you decide to leave England?
Well, I had the year before, I went to Italy for a holiday. And I guess I got the traveling bug at that time.
Yeah.
So I had a friend who, she said, what about going to Canada? And I said, oh, sounds good. If we didn't like it, we could go back to England because we paid our own fare, went to Canada House and got it all arranged.
Yeah.
But I wanted adventure at that age.
And then you arrived in Canada and decided to stay.
Yes. I didn't the first few months because it was so cold.
And then you got used
I was
to it.
going to go back to England, but I didn't.
Yeah. And what was your career like after you left the insurance brokers?
I came to Canada and I was here a few months working for the same company. And then I joined the airline, which was Trans-Canada Airlines, as a flight attendant.
And you did that for how long?
3.5 years because I got married. Those days, when you got married, you had to leave.
Yeah.
You had to be single.
Yeah.
Was that something you agreed with at the time, June? Or
Yes, I agreed with it. Yeah, there's nothing I could do because that was the rule in Trans-Canada Airlines.
Yeah. So you had to be unmarried to work as a flight attendant, or just in the airline in general?
I think most of the airlines were for single girls, single women.
Yeah. And what about pilots? Were they allowed to be married, or did they also?
They
have to
could be
single?
married. Yeah.
So that's a very, you could probably say like bit of a sexist.
Yes.
What's the term? Segregation of
Yes.
employment.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
But they did change the rules later on after they changed the name because they changed from Trans-Canada Airlines to Air Canada, 1964. So then they changed the rules.
Yeah.
And later on, they could be married, they could be pregnant, and so on.
Yeah, because they have to like make the opportunities as equal, because
Yes.
yeah, it just makes the whole operation go smoother when the entirety of the staff can be in agreement of what each other can and can't do.
We didn't really have a union until later on. We did
Yeah.
have a union because one time we went on strike, but it didn't last because
Yeah.
at that time,
People needed to travel.
that's right.
is it true that there was like not only like gender requirements, but height requirements, weight requirements?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about what the
Oh, yes.
criteria of being? And sorry, what was the job title again? It
Flight
was
attendant.
Flight attendant.
Well,
of
they
course,
called it
pardon.
stewardess in those days.
Right.
Yeah. The manual was that thick for the do's and the don'ts.
Yeah.
You couldn't wear certain clothes. You had to wear the uniform. You had to have a certain type of ring if you got engaged. You had to have your hair short. You had to wear certain color nail polish. You had to wear stockings with a seam down the back. You had to wear a girdle. You had to wear a full slip. These are all the do's. And then the don't is that thick.
Yeah.
But nowadays they can do anything really.
Can you share maybe a little bit about your onboarding processes? Was there any, again, you don't need to get into specifics, but you know, what was your training like? And do you think that June can relate with some of that if it's more lax nowadays?
Yeah, it's definitely more relaxed in terms of in terms of requirements. Like my first job, I was an ice cream scooper. They just told me not to wear any profanity or any logos in particular. They just told me to wear black, and then I would put an apron on and then scoop ice cream for like 8 hours.
Oh.
My second job, I worked at a fast food place. They actually gave me a proper uniform and a name tag, so I would wear that for my shifts. And now currently I'm employed at a grocery store. It's more of a formal, like dress requirements, not too formal, but polo shirts, like black proper pants is the uniform, but you can also go a little overboard if you want full, like neck collar and tie. So I work there now for the last 4 to 5 months, and it's been great. It's going great. I'm getting a lot of experience working there. It does feel very welcoming as like a equal workplace.
You have a good personality for it.
Yeah. I love being able to help out the customers when they need questions and feel appreciated.
Good.
Did you like the way things were? And do you like the way things are now? Maybe have a little bit of a conversation about just men and women coexisting in the workplace together.
Well, if you're asking me, I mean, we accepted it because that's the way it was in those days. You didn't question it because that's the way it was. I know they do have males, or they used to, in the airline, and they were stewards.
Yeah.
And I had a friend who was a flight attendant who became a steward. This was in the 60s, maybe 70s by that time.
Yeah.
There was no gender line, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But when I was a flight attendant, it was all women.
Yeah. Nowadays, it's a lot more relaxed in terms of what
exactly
positions men and women
exactly
hold. I feel like that's a lot more better of a system than it used to be. Yeah.
There were too many rules, but at that time, you obeyed the rules.
Yeah.
You
didn't question the rules
because you didn't know any different.
Nowadays, we're getting into an age where we are questioning the rules a lot more.
Oh, yeah.
Looking back and seeing what was and wasn't good.
That's right.
Like, I do feel like what Clinton was talking about, where only women would work the cashiers and only men would do the stocking, is definitely not fair, because
no, that's right.
There's a lot of differences in the job descriptions, because nowadays I usually see more men working the cashiers. In general, I see, so there is definitely still women that work the cashiers, but there's also women that will stock the shelves now.
That's right.
And it opens up the spaces a lot more.
That's right. Which is good.
Yeah.
This is progress.
It also keeps us from being short-staffed, which is a problem a lot of the time.
That's right.
And back when you were younger as well, same age, what was the is there any historical events like way before you were born that helped inspire you or shaped who you are?
Way before I was born?
Yeah, like any historical events that you've like learned about.
Well, I loved history at school. I really loved it. I'm very interested in it now. I go to the historical lectures that they have at Berwick once a month and learn about different times of history. Some are sort of long way away, a long time ago, and some are more up to date. But I can't think of any historical thing really, except the war. I mean, when you're a child and you go through a war, you learn about Hitler and everything else. But I can't recall any historical things then.
Yeah. Because back then you would have been all focused on the war at hand, and there wasn't really any time.
It wasn't until later, when I got to be 12, that we had history as a lesson. You had history, and you had religious instruction, you had art, you had French, you had all kinds of things in those days.
I just wanted to ask, how did it feel seeing your children and your grandchildren learn about the things that you experienced, the war?
Some of them are interested, some are not. My children were interested, and they used to laugh at me because I used to tell them that I was a flight attendant, and they used to say, "Well, did they have a rubber band on the airplane?" You know, stupid things like that.
Yeah.
And I'd say, no, it wasn't that far back.
Yeah.
But no, they were interested if I had any stories to tell them. My grandchildren, as a matter of fact, my one grandson, he at one time asked me my life story. So I used to send him emails of the time I was born, the time the war started, the time it ended, what I went through, and all my marriages and my children. And I think he still has it. He was very interested in that.
Because it's great to learn family history.
Yeah, he's now 41 years old, and he's a father of 2 children himself.
So you have some great grandchildren.
Oh, I have 6.
6. That's a lot.
You're telling me.
It's been great meeting you.
It's great meeting you. And as I said, you look like my grandson.
They have said that if you do not understand your history, you are flying blind. It is important to understand what happened previous in order to chart the course of where you're going. This episode may be over, but I hope it does not fall into the sands of time. History is a very important thing, and I hope we all remember it. So thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next episode, where we are going to be talking about children and family. What do our student guests think about starting a family, and what advice can seniors share from their family history?
Thank you.